Dear students, today we are going to talk about American literature. American literature is a literature written or produced in the United States of America and its preceding colonies. Before the founding of the United States, the British colonies on the eastern coast of the present day United States were heavily influenced by the English literature. The American literature tradition thus began as a part of the broader tradition of English literature. In overview, during its early history, America was a series of British colonies on the eastern coast of the present day United States. Now we are going to talk about the Native American period, pre 1600s. We will discuss all time periods and the notable writings in those time periods. First of all, we are going to talk about the pre 1600s time period. In that time period, oral tradition of the songs and the stories they were famous, and the original authors they were unknown. Written accounts come after the colonization. Actually, those people they were colonized and they were suffering, that's why they were unknown, including the certain stories, myths, and the totems. Here I would like to explain totem. Totem is basically a natural object or the animal that is believed by a particular society to have a spiritual significance and that is adopted by it as an emblem. And the further the archetypes of the trickster and the conjurer they were also in the part of the Native American period in pre 1600s, and this time period actually it focuses on the natural world as a sacred or a holy place. And at that time period the people of that era they considered that the natural world is like a holy place, and they also gave importance to the land and the place. Some of the earliest forms of the American literature. In the earliest forms of the American literature, they were in the form of the pamphlets and the writing extolling the benefits of the colonies to both European and the colonist audience. And the Captain John Smith, he could be considered the first American author. He wrote A True Relation of the Virginia that was published in 1608. American literature in the 1600s to the 1700s. In that time period, there were famous authors like Annie Bradstreet, Thomas Paine, and Benjamin Franklin. Now we are going to these writers one by one. Annie Bradstreet. Annie Bradstreet was the first woman to be recognized as an accomplished New World poet, and her volume of the poetry, The Tenth Muse, lately sprung up in America, received considerable favorable attention when it was first published in London in 1650. 8 years after it appeared, it was listed by William London in his catalogue of the most vendible books in England, and George Srey is reported to have had the volume in his library. Bradstreet's work has endured, and she is still considered to be one of the most important early American poets. Her famous writings are Let Greeks Be Greeks and Women What They Are, and To My Dear and the Loving Husband. Michael Wigglesworth. Michael Wigglesworth wrote the immensely popular at the time poem entitled The Day of the Dome, which talks about the end of the world in context. It is 275 stanzas long. It sold 1800 copies in its first year, and according to the Norton Anthology of the American Literature, Volume 1, about 1 out of every 20 persons in New England bought it. Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards is a theologian, preacher, and the philosopher. His famous writing is Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God is a sermon written by British colonial Christian theologian Jonathan Edwards, preached to his own congregation in Northam, Massachusetts. This writing is a typical sermon of the Great Awakening, emphasizing the teaching that hell is real, a place that actually exists. Edward hoped that the imagery and the language of his sermon would awaken audiences to the horrific reality of hell that awaits them should they continue living without calling on Christ to be saved. Philip Morin Freno. Philip Morin Freno was an American poet, nationalist, also known as the Federalist. A Federalist is actually a person who advocates or supports a system of the government in which the several states unite under a certain central authority. Polemicist, he was also polemicist, a person who engages in controversial debate, a sea captain, and a newspaper editor, and he was also known as the poet of the American Revolution. And through his newspaper, the National Gazette, the name of that newspaper was the National Gazette, he was strong critic of George Washington, and his famous poem is The Fading Rose. Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin is one of the founding fathers of the USA. His works, Poor Richard's Almanac and his own autobiography, were recordings of his rise from a state of the poverty and obscurity to wealth and fame. Some of the mottos we hear today came from him, like lost time is never found again. Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine wrote a very powerful pamphlet entitled Common Sense, which virtually every rebel read. It was proportionally the all-time best-selling American title, which crystallized the rebellious demand for independence from Great Britain. His next work, entitled The American Crisis, was a pre-revolutionary pamphlet series that was so influential that John Adams said, without the pen of the author of the Common Sense, the sword of the Washington would have been raised in vain. Now we are going to talk about the writers in 1800s. Washington Irving, Edgar Allan Poe, and Harriet Beecher Stowe. Washington Irving. Washington Irving wrote the famous short story The Legend of the Sleepy Hollow, which is about the tale of the Headless Horseman. It was among the first American writers to earn acclaim in Europe, and Irving encouraged American authors such as Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and Edgar Allan Poe. Irving was also admired by some European writers, including Walter Scott, Lord Byron, Thomas Campbell, Francis Jeffrey, and Charles Dickens. Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe was an American writer, editor, and literary critic. Poe is best known for his poetry and the short stories, particularly his tales of the mystery and the macabre. A very renowned writer who is still known today. Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. Annabel Lee is the last poem composed by the American author Edgar Allan Poe. Like many of the Poe's poems, it explores the theme of the death of a beautiful woman. The narrator, who fell in love with Annabel Lee when they were young, has a love for her so strong that even angels are envious, and he retained his love for her even after her death. Harriet Beecher Stowe. Harriet Beecher Stowe, she came from a famous religious family and is best known for her novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, and that was published in 1852. It depicts the harsh life for African Americans under slavery. Nathaniel Hawthorne. Nathaniel Hawthorne, he was famous for his notable writing The Scarlet Letter. He was an American novelist, dark romantic, and the short story writer. The Scarlet Letter that was published in 1850, and it was a work of the fiction in historical setting written by Nathaniel Hawthorne and is considered to be his best work. That was set in the 17th century Puritan Boston, Massachusetts during the years 1642 to 1649. It tells the story of Hester Prynne, who conceives a daughter through an affair and struggles to create a new life of repentance and dignity. Throughout the book, Hawthorne explores themes of legalism, sin, and guilt. Herman Melville. Herman Melville, an American novelist, short story writer, and a poet from the American Renaissance period, best known for his whaling work Moby Dick, which was about a sailor who calls him Ishmael, narrates the obsessive quest of Ahab. Now we are going to talk about the writers in the 1900s. T.S. Eliot, Walt Whitman, Samuel Langdon Clemens, and the Emily Dickinson. Walter Whitman. Walter Whitman was an American poet, essayist, and a journalist. He is among the most influential poets in the American canon, often called the father of free verse. His work was very controversial in its time, particularly his poetry collection, Leaves of Grass. Leaves of Grass actually it was described as obscene for its overt sexuality. Thomas Trent Eliot or T.S. Eliot. He was a British American born essayist, publisher, playwright, literary and social critic, and known for his poem The Hollow Man. Hollow Man was published in 1925, which is concerned most with the post-World War Europe. Stephen King's The Dark Tower series makes numerous references to the Hollow Man. Like there is an example. This is what the way word ends. This is what the way word ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. Samuel Langhorne Clemens. He was better known by his pen name Mark Twain, an American author and a humorist. He wrote The Adventures of the John Sawyer, that was published in 1876, and its sequel Adventures of the Huckleberry Finn, that was published in 1885, the latter often called the Great American Novel. Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson, she was an American poet, and Dickinson, she was born in Amherst, Massachusetts, and she is famous for her poem Hope is the Thing with Feathers.